This is video 6 about programming basics, and this is all about loops or iteration. So by this stage you should know what's meant by program flow. We've looked at sequence programs and we've looked at selection programs, so this is looking at something called iteration. It's when things are repeated. So the flow of a program is the order the steps are carried out in. And you can do loops for any sort of repetition that you want in the program. So anytime something needs to be repeated, we can use a loop. There's 4 different types that you need to know for this course. You've got a for loop, a while loop, a do while loop, and a repeat loop. And we're going to look at those individually. So a count controlled loop is when you know how many times you want to repeat something. So we've got 2 different categories of loop, and the first one is a count controlled loop. If you know how many times you want to repeat something, then this is what you would use. The other category of loop is a condition controlled loop, and this is where you are expecting something to be true or false until a certain criteria is met, and then the program will stop looping. So the first example we're going to look at is a for loop, and that falls into the category of count controlled. So a for loop is going to repeat the code that you put inside that loop a fixed number of times. So it will repeat it until you tell it to stop. So how many times do you want to repeat that code? So the number of times usually depends on an initial value, a top value, and a step count. So in other words, that is, what number do you want to start from? When do you want it to stop? And how many times do you want it to increase? So you could count, for example, from 0 to 20, but miss out all of the odd numbers. So here's a little example program to show what a for loop could be used for. Obviously, at the start, we need to declare a for loop to start. And what you do is, just like before, you can have a start initial value, a top value, and a step count. In this particular case, if you just put the number 5 in, it will do it 5 times. So if we wanted to take 5 votes, for example, and it was for maybe like a class president, like who's in charge of the class, and you were only asking 5 people to vote, then what you could do is use this simple system to calculate up what's going to happen. So we're going to run this code that is inside the for loop, and it's going to run 5 times. So the first thing you do is ask them to enter a vote. If what they vote for is equal to John, then it'll say print you voted John. Otherwise, it'll say you voted Dave. So obviously this program is not perfect by any means, but it's very, very simple, and it can help you to understand what is going to be looped. So it's basically just going to run the vote equals input line and the conditions over and over again 5 times. So let's have a little look at some optimized code for that program. So by this stage, you should have a little bit more of an idea of how to program and what's involved. So here at the start, I'm just going to declare 2 variables. And that's not usually necessary in Python, but I'm going to do it just because it's good practice for pseudocode. And you do that way in a lot of other programming languages. So I'm declaring 2 variables, John vote and Dave vote. I'm going to set them as integers so that we can actually add up the votes at the end. Also, I'm going to set them to 0 to start with. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a for loop, and I'm going to put 4 votes in range 20. So votes is basically just a variable that's going to start from 0 and go up, 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 up until it reaches the range, which is 20. I'm going to ask the user to vote. If their vote is equal to John, I'm going to tell them that they voted John just so they know that they've done it right. And then I'm going to add 1 to the initial value of John vote, which starts at 0. Then what we're going to do is we're going to ask or check to see whether they voted for Dave. If they have, it prints you voted Dave and adds 1 to Dave vote. If they enter anything else other than John or Dave, then what happens is it basically just tells them that they've done something wrong and then goes back to the start of the loop again. The word next at the end isn't actually needed, but I like to put it in just so that it's clear where the for loop is ending and when it's going to go to the next iteration. So the program will jump right back up to the start again and ask them to vote. At the end of the loop, so when the loop has run its course and done 20 times, it will then tell you what the total amount of votes are at the end. We've put some concatenation in there so that we can say John has put a variable in and put votes at the end, so it makes a full proper sentence. So the other category of loops, the condition controlled, there's 3 different types that you need to know. So these are all pretty similar to each other because they're always based on some sort of condition. However, they do have some small differences. So the repeat loop is when you start the program and you have some sort of process that you wish to repeat. Then what you do is check whether a certain condition has been met, and if it has, then you stop the program, and if it hasn't, you repeat the process again. So the whole idea is that it's controlled by a condition at the end of the loop, and the program will keep going until that condition is met. Basically, the repeat loop always runs at least once. So it will run at least one time. You basically get an infinite loop if the condition is never true. So this example of a repeat loop, it's not always the most straightforward thing to come up with an example in Python because not all loops are directly doable, but we can make it kind of work with a similar structure. So for a repeat loop, the whole idea is that you repeat something until a condition is met, and that means that the code needs to run at least once. That's what a repeat loop is. So by using the term while true, that means that everything underneath it will definitely run at least once. It basically will run forever unless you tell it to stop. So in this particular case, we're setting a variable called x at 0, and we're just saying forever and ever, I want you to input a vote, check the vote equals John, and check the vote equals Dave if it doesn't equal John. Then what you do is add 1 to x and go back round again. And every time at the end of the loop, it checks to see if x equals 10. If x equals 10, then it will break the loop and then the repeat loop is over. In this particular case, it should loop round 10 times. And then when it does that check at the end, check x will equal 10 and it will break the loop. So a standard while loop is controlled by a condition at the start of the loop. This means that if that condition is not true, it will never run any of the code in the loop at all. If it is true, then it will just keep going and going and going while that condition is set to true. You will get an infinite loop if the condition is always true, so it will just go forever. So a while loop is used while a particular condition is true. So you could set the condition to false at some point during the program. Obviously, this is just one part of a larger program, so you could have some sort of menu option asking them whether they want to vote or not. And if they vote, if they say they do want to, then you could set voting open to true. Then the while loop is going to check that voting open is equal to true. And if it is, it's going to run all of the code underneath. Then at the end of the program, you could then ask them, do you wish to keep voting? If they say no, then you could set voting open to false, and that'll stop doing the loop. A do while loop is very similar to a repeat loop in the sense that basically the program is always going to run at least one time. Then the condition is at the end of the loop, and that allows you to have a forever loop. It will just keep looping and looping and looping if that condition is set to true. So the main difference between a do while loop and a repeat loop is that the condition at the end, you're looking for the reverse with a do while. So while the condition is true, you repeat, whereas on a repeat loop, while the condition is not true, you carry on repeating. So the structure here is basically almost identical to the repeat loop, except the condition at the end is now reversed. So if you want to vote again, then you'll carry on looping, and if you don't want to vote again, then it will end. Whereas with the repeat loop, it was kind of the other way round. You were looking to see whether x was equal to 10, and if it was, then you stop. Whereas in this particular case, when the condition is true, it carries on looping around. So that's the end of the video about loops. I recommend kind of becoming familiar with the one that you are the best at programming in pseudocode or in Python, and just kind of memorizing the basic structure, because you will be able to use that in your algorithm questions in paper 2.